The widow Victoria Winters stood in the dusty street of Skidoo, California, her trembling hands clutching a basket filled with small garments that still smelled faintly of soap and childhood, knowing that selling these last remnants of her babies would keep her alive for perhaps another week. The year was 1877, and the gold-mining town of Skidoo sat nestled in the harsh Panamint Range, a place where fortunes were made and lost with equal speed, where the desert sun beat down mercilessly on those who had nowhere else to go. Victoria had arrived here 3 years ago with her husband Daniel and their 2 young children, full of hope that the mining opportunities would provide them with a better life than the struggling farm they had left behind in Missouri. But fever had swept through the camp last winter, taking first her daughter Emma, then her son Jacob, and finally her husband, leaving Victoria alone in a town that had no patience for weakness or grief. She was 26 years old, though the lines around her eyes made her look older. Her dark hair, once lustrous and carefully pinned, now hung in a simple braid down her back, and her dress, though clean, had been mended so many times that it was difficult to tell what the original fabric had looked like. The basket she carried contained everything she had left of her children, every little shirt and pair of trousers, every small sock and worn shoe. She had already sold their furniture, their books, even Daniel's mining tools. This was all that remained. The main street of Skidoo was busy despite the afternoon heat. Miners moved between the saloons and supply stores, their faces weathered and hard. Women were scarce here, and the few who lived in town either worked in the saloons or were the well-protected wives of successful men. Victoria fit into neither category anymore. She was simply trying to survive. She set up her small display on a wooden crate outside the general store, laying out the tiny clothes with shaking hands. Each piece brought back a flood of memories. Emma's favorite blue dress with the white collar. Jacob's first pair of boots, still so small they seemed impossible. The knitted sweater Victoria had made for him during her pregnancy, working by lamplight while Daniel read aloud from the Bible. A few people walked past, glancing at her display with mild curiosity but no real interest. What would rough miners want with children's clothing? Victoria's heart sank lower with each passing minute. She had known this would be difficult, but she had not anticipated the complete indifference. She needed money for food. She had not eaten a proper meal in 3 days, surviving on water and the last few crackers in her cupboard. "How much for the lot?" the voice startled her. She looked up to see a tall man standing before her, his shadow falling across her makeshift display. He wore the typical attire of a cowboy, dusty leather chaps over worn denim, a faded shirt that might once have been red, and a hat that had seen better days. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, a warm brown that seemed at odds with the hardness of his sun-weathered face. He appeared to be in his early 30s, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and a thick mustache. I have not set individual prices yet," Victoria stammered, caught off guard. "I was going to ask 50 cents for each piece." The man crouched down, examining the clothes with surprising gentleness. His hands, she noticed, were calloused and scarred, the hands of someone who worked hard for his living. He picked up Jacob's little boots, turning them over carefully. "These are well made," he said quietly. Someone loved the child who wore these. Victoria's throat tightened. She could not speak for a moment, fighting back the tears that always seemed so close to the surface these days. Finally, she managed, "I did. I do." The man looked up at her and something in his expression shifted. "How many pieces are here total?" 23, Victoria whispered. "Everything I have left." He stood, reaching into his pocket. "I will give you $15 for everything." Victoria's eyes widened. That was more than she had dared hope for. It was enough for food for nearly a month if she was careful, maybe longer. That is very generous, sir, more than generous. My name is Thomas Sullivan, he said, counting out the bills. Most folks call me Tom, and it is not generous, it is fair. These clothes are worth it. She took the money with trembling hands. I am Victoria Winters. Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. You cannot know what this means. Tom began gathering the clothes, placing them carefully back into her basket. You have family here in Skidoo, Mrs. Winters. The question, asked so gently, nearly broke her composure entirely. No, not anymore. My husband and children, they passed last winter, the fever. Tom's hands stilled on the basket. I am sorry. That is a hard thing, too hard for anyone to bear. I manage, Victoria said, though they both knew it was only partially true. Tom picked up the basket, now full of the clothes he had just purchased. Where do you live? I will walk you home. That is not necessary. I am just down the street, the small cabin near the edge of town. It is no trouble, Tom said. I am heading that direction anyway. They walked together through the dusty street, and Victoria found herself acutely aware of the curious glances from passers-by. Women did not often walk with men in Skidoo unless they were married or worked in the saloons, and she knew how quickly rumors could spread in a small town. But she was too tired and too hungry to care much about gossip. Her cabin was indeed small, barely more than one room with a tiny sleeping area partitioned off by a curtain. Tom set the basket down on her table, looking around the sparse interior. There was almost nothing left. A single chair, the table, a pot hanging over the cold fireplace. The place spoke of poverty so complete it was almost shocking. Mrs. Winters, Tom said slowly. When did you last eat a proper meal? Victoria felt her cheeks burn with shame. I am fine, Mr. Sullivan. Thank you for your concern. That is not what I asked. She met his eyes and saw only genuine concern there, no judgment. Something about his steady gaze made her honest. 3 days ago, but I will go to the store tomorrow and buy supplies. Tom nodded slowly, then did something that surprised her completely. He began taking the children's clothes out of the basket, laying them carefully on her table. What are you doing? Victoria asked, confused. Giving these back, Tom said simply. I do not understand. You bought them. And now I am giving them back to you. He finished unpacking the basket and turned to face her. You should not have to sell your children's things to survive, Mrs. Winters. Keep the money. Keep the clothes. Maybe someday you will want to save them for your grandchildren or pass them on to someone who needs them. But that should be your choice to make, not something forced on you by hunger. Victoria stared at him in disbelief. I cannot accept this. It is charity. I cannot. It is not charity, Tom said firmly. It is one human being helping another. There is no shame in that. The shame is in a town that would let a decent woman go hungry while men drink themselves stupid every night in the saloons. Tears were streaming down Victoria's face now, and she could not stop them. Why are you doing this? You do not even know me. Tom's expression softened. I know enough. I know you loved your children enough to keep their things close even when you had nothing else. I know you are trying to survive with dignity in a town that does not make that easy. That is enough for me. He moved toward the door, then paused. I will be back tomorrow with some supplies. Basic things, flour, coffee, beans. You do not need to thank me, and you do not need to refuse. Just accept that sometimes people want to help. Before Victoria could respond, he was gone, leaving her alone with her children's clothes spread across the table and $15 that felt like a fortune in her pocket. She sank into her single chair and wept, great heaving sobs that came from somewhere deep in her chest. For the first time since Daniel died, they were not entirely tears of grief. There was something else mixed in, something that felt almost like hope. The next morning, Victoria woke to the sound of someone knocking on her door. She had slept better than she had in weeks, partly because she had finally allowed herself to eat a proper portion of her remaining food, knowing she could buy more now, and partly because the heavy weight of despair had lifted slightly. She opened the door to find Tom standing there with two large bags in his arms. "Good morning, Mrs. Winters," he said. "I hope I am not calling too early." "No, not at all," Victoria said, stepping back to let him in. She had tidied the cabin as much as possible and had even managed to wash her face and fix her hair properly for the first time in days. Tom set the bags on the table and began unpacking them. Flour, sugar, coffee, beans, rice, salt pork, dried apples, cornmeal, and even a small jar of honey. It was more food than Victoria had seen in months. "Mr. Sullivan, this is too much," she protested. "Tom," he corrected gently, "and it is just enough. A person needs proper food to live, not just to survive." He finished unpacking and then stood there somewhat awkwardly, as if uncertain what to say next. Victoria found herself equally unsure. The intimacy of having this near stranger in her small cabin, performing such an act of kindness, felt both wonderful and terrifying. "Would you like some coffee?" she asked. "It seems the least I can do, seeing as you brought it." Tom's face broke into a smile, and Victoria was struck by how much younger he looked when he smiled. "I would like that very much." She set about making the coffee, grateful to have something to do with her hands. Tom sat in the only chair, so she remained standing by the fireplace, stirring the pot. "How long have you been in Skidoo?" she asked, wanting to fill the silence. "About 2 years now," Tom said. "I came out from Texas originally. Worked on a ranch there for most of my life, but when the owner died, his son sold the place. I drifted west looking for work and ended up here." "You work in the mines?" "No, I am not much for being underground. I do various jobs, mostly involving horses. Some hauling, some breaking and training, some riding for people who need messages delivered to other towns. It is not steady work, but it keeps me fed and sheltered." Victoria poured the coffee into 2 tin cups, handing one to Tom and keeping the other for herself since she had no second chair. She leaned against the wall, cradling the warm cup in her hands. "You said you came from Texas," she said. "Do you have family there?" Tom's expression clouded slightly. "I did. My parents passed when I was young. Fever like took your family. I was raised by my uncle on his ranch. He passed a few years back. Never married, no children. I have a sister somewhere back east, but we lost touch years ago." "I am sorry," Victoria said softly. "It is the way of things sometimes," Tom said. "People lose each other, but they also find each other." They drank their coffee in companionable silence for a few moments. Victoria found herself studying Tom when she thought he was not looking. He had a strong profile, and despite the hardness that life had clearly carved into him, there was a gentleness in the way he moved, the way he spoke. He was nothing like Daniel had been. Daniel had been scholarly, thoughtful, always with his head in books and dreams. Tom seemed grounded in the practical world, a man who dealt with life as it came. "Mrs. Winters," Tom said, setting down his cup. "I hope you do not think me forward, but I wanted to ask if you might need help with anything else. Repairs to the cabin, or if you need work, I might know of some opportunities." Victoria hesitated. Pride warred with practicality. "I have been looking for work," she admitted. "But there is not much available for a woman in Skidoo. The saloons have made offers, but I cannot. I will not." "Of course not," Tom said quickly. "I would not suggest such a thing, but there are other options. Mrs. Henderson, who runs the boarding house, mentioned she could use help with laundry and cooking. The pay is not much, but it is honest work." "I would be grateful for an introduction," Victoria said, feeling a spark of hope. I will take you to meet her this afternoon if you are willing, Tom offered. They made the arrangement, and Tom left shortly after, promising to return after lunch. Victoria spent the morning in a daze of activity, making herself a proper breakfast with the supplies Tom had brought, then carefully putting away her children's clothes in the trunk where they belonged. Each piece she folded brought both pain and a strange sense of peace. She did not have to let them go yet. Maybe someday, but not today. True to his word, Tom returned that afternoon, and they walked together to the boarding house on the main street. Mrs. Henderson was a stout woman in her 50s with kind eyes and capable hands. She looked Victoria over with an assessing but not unkind gaze. "Tom says you are looking for work," Mrs. Henderson said. "Yes, madam. I am a hard worker, and I am good with laundry and cooking. My husband always said I made the best biscuits in Missouri." Mrs. Henderson smiled. "Well, we are not in Missouri anymore, but I am willing to give you a try. I can offer you $3 a week plus one meal a day. The work is hard, I will not lie to you, but it is steady. $3 a week." It was not much, but combined with the money Tom had given her, it meant survival. It meant dignity. "When can I start?" Victoria asked. "Tomorrow morning, 6 o'clock sharp." They shook hands, and Victoria felt as if she had crossed some invisible threshold. She had work. She had food. She had a chance. As she and Tom walked back toward her cabin, she found herself overcome with gratitude. "Mr. Sullivan, Tom, I do not know how to thank you. You have given me so much." "You do not need to thank me," Tom said. "I am just glad I could help." They reached her cabin, and Victoria hesitated at the door. She did not want him to leave yet, though she could not have explained exactly why. There was something comforting about his presence, something that made the world feel less lonely. "Would you like to stay for supper?" she asked impulsively. "It is the least I can do, and I find myself with an abundance of food thanks to your generosity." Tom looked surprised, then pleased. "I would like that very much." Victoria cooked with more care than she had in months, making cornbread and beans with salt pork, using the precious ingredients Tom had brought. As she worked, Tom sat at the table and told her stories about his time in Texas, about the ranch and the horses and the vast open spaces. His voice was deep and soothing, and Victoria found herself laughing at some of his tales, a sound she had not heard from herself in so long it seemed strange. They ate together as the sun set, casting long shadows through the small window. The food was simple but good, and Tom complimented her cooking with what seemed like genuine appreciation. "You were right about those biscuits," he said, breaking off another piece of cornbread. "If this is any indication, Missouri's loss is California's gain." Victoria felt herself blush at the compliment. "You are kind to say so." After the meal, Tom helped her clean up, something Daniel had never done. Daniel had believed in strict divisions of labor, man's work and woman's work. But Tom seemed to think nothing of drying dishes while she washed them, and they worked together in an easy rhythm that felt natural. When everything was clean and put away, Tom lingered by the door, his hat in his hands. "Thank you for supper, Victoria. It has been a long time since I had a home-cooked meal." She noticed he had used her first name, dropping the formal address, and she found she did not mind. In fact, she liked the way it sounded in his voice. "Thank you for giving me a reason to cook again," she said softly. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an understanding that this was more than just a meal shared between acquaintances. This was the beginning of something, though neither of them was quite ready to name it yet. Tom settled his hat on his head. "I will come by in a few days to check on you if that is all right. Make sure you have everything you need." "I would like that," Victoria said. After he left, she sat in her cabin, feeling the silence differently than she had before. It was not the crushing loneliness that had been her constant companion for months. Instead, it felt like the quiet between notes in a song, full of possibility. The next morning, Victoria arrived at the boarding house promptly at 6 o'clock and threw herself into the work with determination. Mrs. Henderson had not lied about it being hard. There were sheets to wash and hang, meals to prepare for a dozen boarders, floors to sweep, and endless dishes to clean. But Victoria welcomed the exhaustion. It gave her purpose and left her too tired to dwell on her grief. Mrs. Henderson proved to be a fair employer, quick to correct, but also quick to praise when Victoria did well. The other woman working there, a young girl named Sally, was friendly and helped Victoria learn the routine. Tom came by 3 days later, just as he had promised. Victoria was hanging laundry behind her cabin when she saw him approaching, leading a horse. "Good afternoon," he called out. "I hope I am not interrupting." "Not at all," Victoria said, pinning up the last sheet. "I just finished for the day." Tom gestured to the horse, a pretty bay mare with gentle eyes. "I was wondering if you might like to go for a ride. I thought you might enjoy getting out of town for a bit, seeing some of the country around here." Victoria hesitated. She had not been on a horse in years, not since before the children were born. "I am not sure I remember how. It will come back to you," Tom said with an encouraging smile. "And I will be right beside you. We will not go far." Something about the invitation appealed to Victoria. The idea of escaping Skidoo for even a few hours, of seeing something beyond the dusty streets and weathered buildings, was tempting. "All right," she agreed. "But if I fall off, you will have to promise not to laugh." "I promise," Tom said solemnly, though his eyes danced with amusement. He helped her mount the mare, his hand steady and sure as he guided her foot into the stirrup and gave her a boost up. Victoria settled into the saddle, feeling awkward at first, but then her body seemed to remember the motion, the balance required. Tom mounted his own horse, a large roan gelding, and they set off at a gentle walk, heading away from town into the desert landscape. The afternoon sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. The Panamint Range rose in the distance, harsh and beautiful. They rode in silence for a while, and Victoria found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the horse's movement. The wind carried the scent of sage and creosote, and the vast emptiness of the desert felt cleansing rather than frightening. "It is beautiful out here," she said finally. "It is," Tom agreed. "Different from Texas, but beautiful in its own way. You have to look harder to see it, but it is there." They rode to a small rise that overlooked the valley where Skidoo sat, and Tom dismounted, helping Victoria down as well. They stood together, looking out over the harsh landscape that had become their home. "You ever regret coming west?" Victoria asked. Tom considered the question. "Sometimes. But regret does not change anything. You can only move forward, try to make the best of where you are." "That is a practical philosophy." "I am a practical man," Tom said with a slight smile. "Though I suppose that is not very romantic." Victoria looked at him curiously. "Do you want to be romantic?" Tom met her gaze, and there was something in his expression that made her heart beat faster. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "with the right person." They stood there for a long moment, the desert wind blowing around them, and Victoria felt something shift in her chest. It was too soon, she told herself. Daniel had been gone less than a year. It was improper, too fast, too everything. But her heart did not seem to care about propriety or timing. It only knew that for the first time in months, she felt something other than grief. She felt alive. Tom seemed to sense the direction of her thoughts. He took a careful step back, giving her space. "We should head back before it gets dark. The desert is not forgiving at night." They rode back to town slowly, and when they reached her cabin, Tom helped her dismount again. His hands lingered on her waist for just a moment longer than necessary, and Victoria felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Thank you for this afternoon," she said. "I needed it more than I knew." "So did I," Tom admitted. "Victoria, I hope you do not think me presumptuous, but I would like to call on you properly, if you would allow it." Victoria's breath caught. This was a courtship request, formal and serious. Accepting would mean opening herself to the possibility of love again, of loss again. The risk felt enormous, but looking into Tom's honest brown eyes, she found she wanted to take that risk. "I would allow it," she said softly. "I would like it very much." Tom's face broke into a genuine smile, and he squeezed her hand gently before mounting his horse again. "I will see you soon, then." Victoria watched him ride away, her hand still tingling from his touch, and wondered what she was getting herself into. But underneath, the uncertainty was something else, a warmth that spread through her chest like sunshine. Over the following weeks, Tom became a regular presence in Victoria's life. He would stop by after she finished work at the boarding house, sometimes bringing small gifts like wildflowers he had found in the desert or a book he thought she might enjoy. They would take walks together through the town or ride out into the surrounding landscape, always careful to maintain proper appearances, but growing closer with each passing day. Victoria found herself thinking about Tom constantly, looking forward to his visits with an anticipation that both thrilled and frightened her. He was so different from Daniel in every way. Where Daniel had been cerebral and dreamy, Tom was grounded and present. Where Daniel had talked about possibilities and futures, Tom dealt with the reality of now. And yet, she found herself drawn to these differences, finding in them a kind of strength she had not known she needed. Tom was patient with her, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. When she spoke about Daniel and the children, which she did less frequently but still needed to do sometimes, he listened without judgment or jealousy. He seemed to understand that honoring her past was part of who she was, and he did not ask her to forget it. One evening, about 2 months after they had first met, Tom took Victoria to a small restaurant that had recently opened in Skidoo. It was hardly fancy by city standards, but it was the nicest place in town, with real tablecloths and candles on the tables. They sat across from each other, and Victoria was acutely aware of how different she looked now compared to that day when she had tried to sell her children's clothes. She had gained back the weight she had lost, her eyes were brighter, and she wore a new dress that Mrs. Henderson had helped her make from fabric Tom had given her as a gift. She felt almost pretty again. "You look beautiful," Tom said, as if reading her thoughts. "Thank you," Victoria said, feeling the familiar blush creep up her neck. They ordered their food, and as they waited, Tom reached across the table and took her hand. "Victoria, I need to tell you something." His serious tone made her nervous. "What is it?" "I am falling in love with you," he said simply. "I think I have been since the first day I saw you on that street, trying to be so brave and strong even though your world had fallen apart. And I need you to know that I am not trying to replace what you lost. I could never replace your husband or your children. But I am hoping that maybe, someday, you might have room in your heart for something new. For me." Victoria felt tears spring to her eyes. No one had spoken to her with such honesty and vulnerability in so long. Tom's words were not flowery or poetic, but they were real and true, and they touched something deep inside her. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered. "It terrifies me, Tom. I am so afraid of losing someone again." "I know," Tom said, squeezing her hand. "I am afraid too. But being afraid is not a reason to turn away from something good. Life is full of risks. The question is which risks are worth taking." "And you think this is worth the risk?" Victoria asked. "I know it is," Tom said firmly. "You are worth any risk." Their food arrived, but Victoria barely tasted it. Her mind was spinning with the implications of what they had just admitted to each other. This was real. This was happening. She was falling in love again, and the world had not ended. In fact, it felt like it was beginning anew. After dinner, Tom walked her home, and at her door he pulled her gently into his arms. It was the first time he had truly held her, and Victoria melted into his embrace, feeling safe and cherished in a way she had not felt in so long. "May I kiss you?" Tom asked softly. Victoria nodded, and Tom lowered his head, pressing his lips to hers in a kiss that was gentle and sweet and full of promise. When they pulled apart, Victoria was breathless. "I should let you go inside," Tom said reluctantly. "I know," Victoria agreed, but neither of them moved for a long moment. Finally, Tom stepped back. "Good night, Victoria." "Good night, Tom." She watched him walk away into the darkness, her fingers touching her lips where he had kissed her, and knew that she had crossed another threshold. There was no going back now, only forward into whatever future they would build together. The next few months passed in a blur of happiness. Victoria continued working at the boarding house, and Tom continued his various jobs around town, but they spent every free moment together. The people of Skidoo began to accept them as a couple, and while there was some gossip about the propriety of a widow remarrying so soon, most people seemed genuinely pleased for them. Mrs. Henderson became something of a champion for their relationship, telling anyone who would listen that Victoria deserved happiness after all she had been through. Sally, the young girl who worked with Victoria, was delighted by the romance and would tease Victoria gently about her blushing whenever Tom came by. As winter approached, bringing cooler temperatures to the desert, Tom began to talk more seriously about the future. One Saturday afternoon, as they sat together on the small bench outside Victoria's cabin, he broached the subject that had been on both their minds. "Victoria, I want to marry you," he said. "I know we have not been courting very long by traditional standards, but I am not getting any younger, and I know what I want. I want to build a life with you." Victoria's heart soared at his words, but practical concerns immediately arose. "Where would we live?" "This cabin is barely big enough for one person." "I have been thinking about that," Tom said. "I have some money saved up, and I have been talking to some people. There is land available not far from here, good land with water. We could build a small ranch, raise horses. It would be hard work, but we could make a life there, a real life." "A ranch," Victoria repeated, trying to imagine it. "I know it is asking a lot," Tom said quickly. "You would have to leave the boarding house, leave the security of town." "But Victoria, I promise I would work every day to make sure you never went hungry again, never had to sell anything precious to survive. I would build you a home, a real home with rooms for—" He paused, seeming uncertain. "For what?" Victoria prompted. "For children, if God blesses us with them," Tom finished quietly. "I know that might be painful to think about, given what you lost, but I would like to have a family with you if you are willing." Victoria felt tears slide down her cheeks. The thought of having children again was both wonderful and terrifying. What if she lost them too? What if she was not strong enough to love again and risk that kind of pain? But looking at Tom's hopeful face, she realized that she was strong enough. She had survived the worst thing that could happen to a mother, and she was still here. She was still capable of love, still capable of hope. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you. And yes, I would like to have children with you and build a ranch and make a life together. I want all of it." Tom let out a whoop of joy and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around until she was laughing and dizzy. When he set her down, he kissed her soundly, not caring who might see. "I will make you happy," he promised. "I swear it." "You already have," Victoria said. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Skidoo. Victoria wore a dress that Mrs. Henderson and Sally had helped her make, pale blue with white lace at the collar and cuffs. Tom wore a new suit that he had ordered special from Los Angeles, and he looked so handsome that Victoria felt her breath catch when she saw him waiting for her at the altar. Mrs. Henderson and her husband stood as witnesses, along with Sally and several other people from town who had become friends over the months. It was a small gathering, but it was warm and genuine, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Victoria felt a sense of rightness settle over her. The wedding breakfast was held at the boarding house, with Mrs. Henderson pulling out all the stops to create a feast. There was roasted chicken and potatoes, fresh bread, apple pie, and even champagne that someone had brought from San Francisco. People toasted the happy couple and wished them well, and Victoria felt surrounded by goodwill and affection. That evening, Tom brought Victoria to a small house on the edge of town that he had rented for the winter. It was more spacious than her cabin, with a real bedroom and a proper kitchen. "I know it is not much," Tom said as he carried her over the threshold, "but it will do until we can build the ranch." "It is perfect," Victoria said, and she meant it. Anywhere with Tom would be perfect. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, both of them nervous and excited. Tom was patient and gentle, and Victoria found herself responding to him with a passion that surprised her. She had loved Daniel, but this was different. This was a mature love between two people who had both known loss and were choosing to build something new together. Afterward, they lay together in the darkness, Victoria's head on Tom's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Are you happy?" Tom asked softly. "I am," Victoria said, and realized with some wonder that it was true. "I never thought I would be happy again, but I am." "Good," Tom said, kissing the top of her head. "That is all I want, to make you happy." They spent the winter making plans for the ranch. Tom would ride out to the land he had found, measuring and planning where to build the house and the barn. Victoria continued working at the boarding house for a while, saving money to add to their fund. They spent their evenings together, sometimes reading aloud to each other, sometimes just talking about their dreams for the future. In late January, Victoria realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with a complex mixture of joy and terror. She wanted this baby desperately, but the fear of loss was overwhelming. She remembered too clearly the pain of losing Emma and Jacob, the devastating emptiness that had consumed her. When she told Tom, he held her close and let her cry out her fears. "I am so scared," she sobbed. "What if something happens? What if I lose this baby too?" "You might," Tom said honestly. "I cannot promise you that nothing bad will ever happen. But I can promise that whatever happens, we will face it together. You will not be alone this time, Victoria. Never alone." His words gave her the strength she needed. She would not let fear rob her of the joy of this pregnancy. She would trust in God and in Tom and in herself. As winter gave way to spring, work began on the ranch. Tom hired several men to help with the building, and Victoria would ride out with lunch for them, watching as the structure took shape. The house was modest but well built, with 2 bedrooms, a large kitchen, and a sitting room. The barn was even larger, designed to house the horses that Tom planned to raise and train. By the time summer arrived, the buildings were complete, and they moved in. Victoria was 5 months pregnant by then, her belly beginning to round noticeably. She threw herself into making the house a home, sewing curtains, arranging furniture, planting a small garden. Tom proved to be an excellent rancher. He had a gift with horses, able to gentle even the most spirited animals. He began taking in horses to train, and word spread quickly about his skill. People came from all over the region to have Tom work with their horses, and the money began to come in steadily. Victoria's pregnancy progressed smoothly, and as the months passed, her fear began to ease. Tom was attentive and caring, making sure she did not overwork herself, bringing her small treats from town, talking to her belly at night and telling the baby stories about the ranch and the horses. In late October, as the desert began to cool with the approach of winter, Victoria went into labor. Tom rode hard to fetch the midwife from town, a capable woman named Mrs. Rodriguez who had delivered half the babies in Skidoo. The labor was long and difficult, but Victoria was strong, and Tom stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and encouraging her. Finally, as the sun rose on a new day, their son was born, healthy and loud and perfect. Tom held the baby with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face. "He is beautiful," he said in wonder. "Victoria, he is perfect." "What should we name him?" Victoria asked, exhausted but happy. Tom looked at her seriously. "I was thinking about that. What would you think about naming him Daniel Jacob after your husband and son? I know it might be painful, but I want to honor them. They were part of your life, and that makes them part of ours." Victoria felt fresh tears spring to her eyes at Tom's thoughtfulness. "You would do that, of course," Tom said. "They deserve to be remembered." And so their son was named Daniel Jacob Sullivan, called Danny by his parents. Victoria found that rather than being painful, the name was healing. It was a way of keeping the memory of her first family alive while embracing her new one. Danny was a happy baby, easy-going and quick to smile. Tom doted on him, carrying him around the ranch and showing him the horses even though he was far too young to understand. Victoria would watch them together, her heart so full she thought it might burst. The ranch continued to prosper. Tom's reputation grew, and he was able to hire a young man named Peter to help with the work. Victoria managed the household and the accounts and discovered she had a head for business. Together, she and Tom made a formidable team. When Danny was a year old, Victoria found herself pregnant again. This time, the fear was much less. She had carried one baby to term successfully, and she had faith that she could do it again. Their daughter was born the following spring, a tiny thing with dark hair and her father's brown eyes. They named her Rosalina, and she was as fierce and demanding as her brother had been easygoing. Life settled into a rhythm of work and family. The ranch grew, and they added cattle to their holdings. Tom built an addition onto the house, giving them 2 more bedrooms and a proper dining room. Victoria planted fruit trees and expanded her garden. They made friends with neighboring ranchers and became pillars of the small community that was developing around Skidoo. On Danny's 3rd birthday, Tom surprised Victoria by presenting her with a beautiful wooden box he had made himself. Inside were all the clothes she had once tried to sell, carefully preserved. "I thought maybe our children could wear them," Tom said. "If you would like, or if it is too painful, we could save them for grandchildren someday." Victoria lifted out Emma's blue dress, and for the first time the sight of it brought only sweet memories, no pain. "I think Rose should wear this," she said. "Emma would have liked that, knowing her things were being used and loved." And so the clothes were brought out and used again, each piece carrying with it stories of the past, but creating new memories for the future. Danny wore Jacob's little boots, and Rose wore Emma's dresses, and Victoria found a kind of peace in the continuity of it. Years passed. Danny and Rose grew into strong, healthy children. Tom's hair began to show threads of silver, and Victoria found smile lines had replaced the grief lines around her eyes. The ranch became one of the most successful in the region, known for quality horses and honest dealing. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Tom took Victoria back to the place where they had first ridden together, the rise overlooking Skidoo. The town had grown in the intervening years, but the desert was unchanged, still harsh and beautiful. "You remember the first time I brought you here?" Tom asked, his arm around her waist. "I remember everything about our early days," Victoria said. "I remember thinking I would never be happy again, and then you came along and proved me wrong." "You saved me too, you know," Tom said. "I was just drifting before I met you, no purpose, no home. You gave me a reason to build something, to be something more than I was." They stood together in silence for a moment, watching the sun begin its descent toward the mountains. "You ever think about that day I tried to sell the children's clothes?" Victoria asked quietly. "Sometimes," Tom admitted. "I think about what might have happened if I had just walked past you like everyone else did. I think about how close we came to never knowing each other." "But you did not walk past," Victoria said. "You stopped. You saw me. You helped me. You gave me back more than just those clothes, Tom. You gave me back my life." "We gave each other a life," Tom corrected. "That is what love does. It does not just take, it gives. It builds. It creates something new out of broken pieces." Victoria turned to face him, reaching up to touch his weathered face. "I love you, Thomas Sullivan. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you, Victoria Sullivan," Tom said, pulling her close. "Always and forever." They kissed as the sun set over the desert, two people who had found each other in the midst of loss and built something beautiful together. The years continued to pass in a steady stream of seasons. Danny grew into a tall, serious young man who had his mother's compassion and his father's way with horses. At 21, he married a sweet girl named Margaret from a neighboring ranch, and they built a small house on the far end of the Sullivan property. Rose, true to the fierce spirit she had shown as a baby, grew into a strong-willed young woman who had no patience for the traditional limitations placed on her gender. At 19, she announced she wanted to train horses just like her father, and despite some raised eyebrows from neighbors, Tom and Victoria supported her completely. She proved to be as talented as her father, and the Sullivan Ranch became known for having the finest horse trainers in California, father and daughter working side by side. Tom and Victoria's hair turned silver, their faces lined with the marks of a life well lived. They added grandchildren to their family, first Danny and Margaret's twin boys, then more as the years went on. The house echoed with the sounds of children again, and Victoria found joy in spoiling her grandchildren the way she had never been able to spoil Emma and Jacob. On quiet evenings, when the work was done and the grandchildren were asleep, Tom and Victoria would sit together on the porch they had added to the house, watching the stars come out over the desert. Victoria would sometimes take out the old clothes, now worn from being used by multiple generations, and remember. She remembered Daniel and Emma and Jacob with love and sadness, but the sadness no longer threatened to drown her. She had learned that the heart was capable of holding both grief and joy, both past and present, both loss and love. She had learned that moving forward did not mean forgetting. It meant carrying the past with you while building something new. Tom, as if sensing her thoughts, would take her hand and hold it, his touch as comforting now as it had been when they first met. They did not always need words. After so many years together, they could communicate in silence, understanding flowing between them like water. "You have any regrets?" Victoria asked one evening as they sat watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Tom considered the question seriously, as he always did. "I regret that I did not meet you sooner, that we could not have had more years together. But I do not regret anything we have done or any choice we have made. Do you?" "No," Victoria said honestly. Even the painful things, the losses, they made me who I am. And who I am is someone who loves you and our life together. I would not change that for anything. Not even to have your first family back? Tom asked gently. Victoria thought about it. It was a question she had asked herself many times over the years. If I could have them back without changing anything else, of course I would choose that. But life does not work that way. Everything is connected. If Daniel and the children had lived, I would never have met you. I would never have had Danny and Rose. I would never have built this life. And as much as I loved them, I cannot wish away the life I have now. It feels like a betrayal of everyone I love to wish for a different path. That is not a betrayal, Tom said firmly. That is wisdom. That is acceptance. That is choosing to live fully in the present while honoring the past. They sat in companionable silence as the stars emerged, bright and clear in the desert sky. Inside the house, they could hear Rose laughing at something, and the sound of the grandchildren playing. The ranch was quiet except for the occasional whicker of a horse or the distant howl of a coyote. This was home. This was family. This was love. When Tom and Victoria celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary, the whole community turned out for the party. Danny and Margaret organized everything, with Rose handling the cooking and the grandchildren running wild with excitement. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, stories told and memories shared. As Tom led Victoria in a slow dance under the stars, surrounded by everyone they loved, Victoria felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. She had been given a second chance at life, at love, at happiness. She had taken that chance despite her fears, and it had led her here to this moment, to this man, to this beautiful, complicated, messy, wonderful life. Thank you, she whispered to Tom as they danced. For what? He asked. For seeing me that day on the street, for buying those clothes, for giving them back, for giving me a reason to hope again. Tom pulled her closer. Thank you for letting me love you, for being brave enough to love again, for building this life with me. They danced until the moon was high and the party began to wind down, until the grandchildren were asleep and the guests had gone home, until it was just the two of them again, the way it had been in the beginning. More years passed, each one precious. Tom and Victoria grew old together, their steps slower, their bodies less capable than they once were, but their love as strong as ever. They handed over more of the ranch work to Danny and Rose, content to advise and support rather than manage every detail. They took to spending their mornings in the garden Victoria had planted so many years ago, now mature and lush. Tom would sit on the bench he had built, while Victoria tended her flowers and vegetables, and they would talk about everything and nothing, enjoying the simple pleasure of each other's company. On Tom's 68th birthday, as they sat in the garden in the early morning coolness, he turned to Victoria with a serious expression. "If I go first," he said without preamble, "I want you to know that loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life. Every day with you has been a gift." "Do not talk like that," Victoria said, feeling a familiar fear clutch at her heart. "You are not going anywhere." "We are all going somewhere eventually," Tom said gently. "I just want to make sure you know, just in case." "I know," Victoria said, taking his hand, "and you need to know the same. If I go first, you have given me everything a woman could want. You have loved me well and truly, and I have been happy. So happy." "Good," Tom said, satisfied. "That is all I wanted, to make you happy." They sat together until the sun grew too warm, then went inside to where Rose was making breakfast, to where the grandchildren were starting to arrive for the day, to where life continued in all its beautiful, ordinary chaos. Tom lived another 5 years, healthy and active until the very end. He died peacefully in his sleep one winter night, Victoria beside him as she had been for 30 years. She woke in the morning to find him gone, his face peaceful, his hand still holding hers. The grief was sharp and immediate, but it was different from the grief she had felt when Daniel died. She had lost her partner, her love, her best friend, and the pain was real and deep. But she was not alone in it. She had her children, her grandchildren, her friends. She had the ranch Tom had built and the life they had created together. She had memories upon memories of happy days and loving nights. At Tom's funeral, Victoria stood strong and dry-eyed, accepting condolences from what seemed like half of California. People came from all over to pay their respects to a man who had been known for his integrity, his kindness, and his skill. Victoria listened to story after story about Tom helping someone, giving advice, going out of his way to be of service. She had known he was a good man, but hearing it confirmed by so many others gave her comfort. After everyone had left and Tom was laid to rest on a hill overlooking the ranch, Victoria went home to the empty house. Danny and Rose wanted her to stay with one of them, but she refused. This was her home, hers and Tom's, and she was not ready to leave it. She sat in Tom's chair in the sitting room and let herself cry, great heaving sobs that came from the depths of her soul. She cried for Tom, for Daniel, for Emma and Jacob, for all the losses she had endured in her life. She cried until she had no more tears, until she was empty and exhausted. And then, in the silence that followed, she felt something. Not a presence exactly, but a sense of peace. She had loved and been loved. She had built a life of meaning and purpose. She had survived loss and found joy again. She had done what Tom had wanted. She had been happy. Victoria lived another 8 years, surrounded by her family, active in the ranch until the very end. She taught her granddaughters to garden and sew, taught her grandsons about keeping accounts and treating people fairly. She told them stories about their grandfather, about his kindness and strength, about how he had saved her when she had nothing left. She also told them about Daniel and Emma and Jacob, keeping their memory alive for a new generation. She wanted her grandchildren to understand that life was complex, that love could come more than once, that loss did not have to be the end of the story. On a warm spring morning, Victoria woke feeling tired in a way she had never felt before. She knew, with the certainty that comes at the end of a long life, that her time was near. She called for Danny and Rose, and they came immediately, gathering around her bed with their families. "Do not be sad," Victoria told them, her voice weak but clear. "I have lived a full life, a good life. I have been blessed beyond measure." "We love you, Mama," Rose said, tears streaming down her face. "And I love you," Victoria said. "All of you. You have been my joy, my purpose. Raise your children well, love each other, and remember that hope is never truly lost. Even in the darkest times, there is always a chance for something beautiful to emerge." She looked around at all the faces surrounding her, this family she had built from the ashes of loss. Danny with his quiet strength, Rose with her fierce spirit, the grandchildren with their bright futures ahead of them. This was her legacy, this love, this family, this life. "Tell them," she whispered to Rose. "When they are old enough, tell them the story of how your father and I met. Tell them about the clothes, about the kindness of a stranger, about choosing to love again even when it is frightening. Tell them that story." "I will," Rose promised. "I will make sure they all know." Victoria closed her eyes, feeling peaceful. She had said what she needed to say. She had lived the life she was meant to live. And now, finally, she could rest. She drifted off to sleep and did not wake again. She passed quietly, surrounded by love, her last breath a gentle sigh of release. They buried her next to Tom on the hill overlooking the ranch, and the whole community mourned the passing of a woman who had embodied resilience and grace. The ranch continued, passed down to Danny and Rose and eventually to their children, a testament to what two people could build when they chose love over fear. Years later, Rose's daughter would write down the story her mother had told her, the story of how a widow had tried to sell her children's clothes for food, and how a cowboy had bought everything and given it back. The story of how one act of kindness had sparked a love that lasted a lifetime and created a legacy that would endure for generations. The clothes themselves, too worn to use anymore, were carefully preserved in a glass case in the ranch house, a reminder of where it all began. Visitors would look at those tiny, faded garments and hear the story, and they would understand that love could emerge from the most unlikely circumstances, that hope could be found even in the darkest moments, that kindness had the power to change lives. The ranch still stands today, worked by the descendants of Tom and Victoria Sullivan, a living monument to two people who found each other when they both needed saving and built something that would outlast them both. The land they chose together, the horses they raised, the family they created, all of it remains as proof that sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of another. And if you visit on a quiet evening, when the sun is setting over the Panamint Range and the desert wind carries the scent of sage, you might almost feel their presence there still. Two souls who loved deeply and well, who chose hope over despair, who built a life worth remembering. Their story lives on, passed from generation to generation, a reminder that kindness matters, that love is always worth the risk, and that from the greatest loss can come the most profound joy. The story of Victoria and Tom Sullivan is not just a story about survival or even about love, though it is certainly both of those things. It is a story about the resilience of the human spirit, about the capacity we all have to begin again, to open our hearts even after they have been broken, to build something beautiful from the broken pieces of our lives. It is a story that reminds us that we are never truly alone, that sometimes help comes from unexpected places, and that one moment of compassion can change the entire trajectory of a life. The children's clothes that Victoria once tried to sell became a symbol of transformation, of moving from desperation to hope, from loss to love. They represented the past, but also the future, the continuity of family and the enduring power of memory. In preserving them, Tom and Victoria honored what came before while embracing what was to come, teaching their descendants that both are important, both deserve recognition, both have value. Their love story, born from an act of kindness on a dusty street in Skidoo, California, in 1877, became the foundation for generations of Sullivans who would carry forward the values Tom and Victoria embodied. Hard work and integrity, compassion and strength, the courage to love and the wisdom to forgive, both themselves and life for its cruelties and surprises. These lessons, learned through pain and joy, through loss and discovery, became the inheritance they left to their children and grandchildren, more valuable than any amount of land or money. In the end, what mattered most was not the hardship they endured or the success they achieved, but the love they shared and the family they built together. Everything else flowed from that central truth, that two broken people had found each other and had the courage to believe in the possibility of happiness again. They took a chance on each other, on love, on life, and it was a gamble that paid off in ways neither could have imagined when they first met on that hot afternoon so long ago. Their story reminds us all that it is never too late to begin again, that kindness has immeasurable power, and that love, when we are brave enough to embrace it, can heal even the deepest wounds and create beauty from ashes. Victoria and Tom Sullivan lived this truth every day of their lives together, And in doing so, they left behind a legacy that continues to inspire all who hear their story.